Coming out to join us. This meeting is being recorded. We've got a few introductory speakers here tonight that are gonna start things off for us. So David, why don't you come up and say a few words? The meeting's being recorded. Thank you.
Hello, everyone. My name is Jeff Luff. I'm the Economic Development Director for the town. We're here to introduce to you Route 67 Transportation Alternative. It's a great project, and we're really hoping that you all enjoy it, and it's going to have a great future for the town. We've worked hard with Aaron and Casey here. And first, before we get started, I'm going to introduce you to Dave Labriola, our state representative. That's also going to talk a little bit about it. Thank you, and appreciate your time for coming out and joining us on this project. Thank you.
Yep.
Thank you for that rousing applause. So I'm Dave Labriola, State Representative, and yeah, thank you for your interest in this project. It is a great project, as Jeff said. It's very exciting. As a State Representative, I have the honor and the opportunity, I believe, to seek grants and funding that will help this project. I know there's some federal money, which Casey and Aaron will speak to, that the federal government is funding some of the study costs. But you know, it's going to really beautify our town, and it's going to provide economic development opportunities, and it's plain and simply, it's going to increase the quality of life of our community, the community we love so well. So thank you again for all being here. I'm going to turn it over to Aaron and then Casey, and then we'll have questions and input afterwards. Thanks again.
Thank you. It's out of sync. You can pull up the speaker notes, and if you hover over PowerPoint, you'll probably get it. Down at the bottom in the test. Yeah, you can probably get to the speaker notes.
Okay, very good. All right, good evening. I'd like to just give a little brief history of the project and some background information to help frame the presentation and the discussion that'll follow. So Oxford, as you all know, does not have a typical walkable New England downtown. Functionally, State Route 67 serves as the town's main street. The municipal center, Quarry Walk, and the major commercial areas are all located around this route, but there's currently no way to safely access any of them or transit in Seymour without a personal motor vehicle. The town and the residents address that issue in the Oxford Plan of Conservation and Development, or POCD. The POCD prioritized creating a plan for streetscape improvements along Route 67 in order to improve non-motorized access to the corridor, create access to the Little River, and open spaces, and generally create a more of a downtown feel on Route 67. In 2016, the Oxford Main Street Project Committee was formed out of that planning process with the goal of creating a pedestrian and bicycle-friendly pathway along the Little River and Route 67. The committee worked initially on the Little River Nature Preserve and developing concepts for streetscape and bike ped improvements in that vicinity. The town began applying for various grants for individual improvement projects on Route 67 around 2016. What was missing, however, was a comprehensive plan looking at the entire corridor, assessing needs and constraints, and presenting a plan for connecting individual projects. This type of plan would help funders see that all the little individual projects the town is proposing are part of a larger vision, and that the town is planning to implement that vision. So the town requested NVCOG's assistance. So I work for the Naugatuck+Valley Council of Governments, your regional planning agency. And we worked with the town to create a scope for the Oxford Route 67 alternative transportation study. The goal of the study is to establish preferred bicycle, pedestrian, and transit improvements within the Route 67 corridor, with input from the town, the Connecticut Department of Transportation, key stakeholders, and the public, and to provide Oxford with information including project concept designs, phasing, costs, and potential funding sources to help the town procure funding and to advance projects and concepts. NVCOG allocated available federal transportation planning funds to the project, and Trans Systems was selected to conduct the study. For the last 18 months, Trans Systems has worked with the Oxford Main Street Plan Committee, Project Committee, to study the corridor and the feasibility of transit service in Oxford and to develop recommendations about how best to route a bicycle and pedestrian trail along Route 67. Early concepts were presented at a public meeting last fall, and input from stakeholders and the public was used to further refine those recommendations. Tonight, those refined concepts will be presented, and you'll have an opportunity to ask questions of the project team and to offer comments. We'll be publishing a draft report shortly, followed by a 30-day comment period. Those comments will be incorporated into the final report that you should expect this summer. You can find project reports, interactive maps, meeting reports, and really any information about this, this project you could imagine on our website. And there's also a portal to a comment page where you can provide comments as well. So before I hand over things to Casey, who's going to walk you through the study and recommendations, I just wanted to mention some examples of multi-use trails similar to the one being proposed along Route 67. So you don't have to look far to see some really great examples of successful multi-use trail development. The Farm and Canal Trail and the Naugatuck River Greenway are in the region. They're both very popular trails for recreation, and they also offer residents and visitors a mean for non-motorized transportation. An even better example of the type of trail that is envisioned for the Route 67 corridor is right next door in Middlebury. The Middlebury Greenway was built along State Route 64, which is pretty similar to Route 67. The trail connects residential and commercial areas of Middlebury and provides access to open space and parks. I'd venture that very few people were walking or biking along Route 64 before the trail was built, but now with the trail, we've recorded nearly 70,000 trips in 2019 and over 76,000 trips last year at one trail location. So there's a lot of people using that trail and similar multi-use trails. And I think you could expect similar use out of the trail in Oxford. That type of use on multi-use trails brings with it substantial economic, health, and quality of life benefits that have been documented on similar trails across the country. In fact, NVCOG studied the economic impacts of the Naugatuck River Greenway Trail a few years ago and found that the economic benefits of a multi-use trail far outweigh the cost of building one many times over. Those benefits are not specific to the Naugatuck River Greenway. Those benefits are really on any trail like this. So if you're interested to learn more, you can find that report on our website. And with that, I'll introduce Casey Hardin, who is the project manager at Trans Systems and has been working with the town and the COG on this project.
Thank you, Aaron. Good evening, everyone. Thanks again for joining us. This is my first kind of jaunt back into the real public meeting after doing quite a few virtual ones. So it's nice to see some faces and really, really pleasantly surprised with the turnout. This is great. And the one thing that doesn't happen back in my house is the fan of the projector shooting hot air onto me. So I apologize if I start to look a little sweaty. So I'm going to go through starting with our existing conditions analysis, looking at the existing Route 67 corridor, and essentially what you'll see is kind of why not very many people walk and bike there today. And so we're going to show you how we think we can develop a facility that will be safe and comfortable for all different types of users, provide some nice connections to recreation and nature, and also help people move around in a way that doesn't necessarily require their car. So the first thing we did is study Route 67 itself. We wanted to understand the facility from a vehicle perspective, what we're dealing with. So traffic volumes are fairly high. They're above 10,000 vehicles per day, which is a metric we use that kind of generally indicates a pretty busy roadway. It's classified as a minor arterial. That means within the way the roadway system is structured, it's relied upon to move people around. It's not a local road. It's not a what we call a collector that kind of carries smaller amounts of traffic. It's moving people between places, and speeds are high. Just anecdotally from driving in the corridor, if you're not going 50, you can collect a trail of cars pretty quickly. And we looked at a couple different metrics for that. There's a new technology called Streetlight that utilizes people's phones, location-based services. And that allows us to calculate an average speed from end to end, sort of what you would average if you drove that. And that's between 35 to 40 miles an hour. But that factors in all the times you might stop at a stoplight at Great Hill Road or slow down for somebody turning left. So we also measured speeds at individual points right in the middle of Oxford Center. And so that showed us an average speed for northbound traffic of 43 miles an hour, southbound 47 miles an hour. And that fit kind of with what I expected. And what it actually shows you, now the spot speeds were taken, I don't know how big this photo is behind me, it's not very big. It's right about where the Oxford Bakery is, so right near Town Hall. So if you're driving northbound, you've already been through that slightly developed Oxford Center area for, about half a mile, and you've seen some businesses. And so that's why that northbound speed ends up being a little slower. And then if you're coming southbound, you've really just entered that little node of development. And so what I'm trying to get to with that is how development and buildings and activity can have a calming effect on travel speeds, just all of their own. And that's one of the things that I think as this trail gets developed, as lighting and different facets come into play and you start to see some of that activity, that could help the vehicle speeds that we see out there today. And we also looked at crashes. There's not a real significant amount of them in the northern part of the corridor. And most of what we see are in the southern part where some of the signalized intersections are, Great Hill Road, Park Road, West Street, kind of those traffic signals. And that's kind of to be expected. Not a lot of injuries, a lot of rear end collisions. So we don't really see a big vehicular safety problem other than those speeds when you look at the potential for walking and biking. In terms of sidewalks, there's really none along Route 67 except for the recently constructed part in front of Quarry Walk. The map, which might be a little difficult to read for those of you towards the back, those blue lines are sidewalks, and the Route 67 corridor kind of runs diagonally through the middle of the map here. You can see there's really not a lot of blue. And so that lack of pedestrian infrastructure makes it hard, especially when paired with those travel speeds. I took this photo standing in the about 3.5 foot shoulder with a guide rail right next to me and cars going past me at 50 miles an hour. It's not comfortable. And that was all to go get a nice toffee at Oxford Bakery after I'd parked on the other side. So, I can imagine, and having been out there doing a few site visits, there are people who walk that full length of it. And it can be an uncomfortable feeling. And then when I look at the other kind of aspect of active transportation in terms of bicycling and think about kind of how you'd feel trying to ride your bicycle along Route 67, I look at this chart. This chart is something that's produced by the American Association of State Highway and Transportation Officials called AASHTO. They govern everything we do as engineers. And what it's looking at is the volume of a roadway along the y-axis here, and then the speed the vehicles are going along the x-axis. And then so what we do is we look at that, we kind of plot where our road is, and it recommends the type of facility that would be comfortable to all types of bicyclists. So not just your hardened, the guys you see out there every weekend riding 50 miles, but families, kids, the elderly, folks that aren't going to be as comfortable right next to a speeding vehicle. And I'll tell you, our plot puts us about here. So it's kind of off the chart in terms of speed and volume. And what that points us to in terms of a facility is a separated shared use path. So a facility that provides separation for bicyclists from that vehicular traffic. So something we don't want to put them on the roadway shoulder. Now, confident cyclists may feel comfortable with that even after this separate path would be constructed. They may still do that because they may be more comfortable there than with potentially slower pedestrians. But ultimately, this type of facility would be comfortable for all users. So that results in a recommendation for a 10-foot wide side path. A side path is what we call that shared use trail when it runs directly parallel or next to a roadway. So it essentially to the layperson may look like a sidewalk, but it's wide enough so that both bicyclists and pedestrians can use it. And we'd like to space it away from the roadway as far as possible. There are some locations where, based on the proximity of the Little River, there are some developments with some parking. There are needs from a property perspective. We don't want to have more easements than necessary, but ideally we'd like to provide a 5-foot or larger, what we call a buffer. And that provides a little bit of space to separate the facilities. And if you go narrower than that, the recommendation from AASHTO, again, is to provide a guide railing between the two facilities. And the reason they're talking about that is if someone were on a bicycle and they were to fall off, you wouldn't want them to fall into the roadway. That's really the primary reason they recommend that guide rail between the road and the side path if you can't provide that 5-foot buffer. Now, in many of the locations as we go through the corridor, places that we're recommending a narrower than 5-foot buffer already have guide rail already. So that's something that when we worked with the Department of Transportation, guide rail in and of itself is a hazard to motorists. It's something they can hit. So we don't want to introduce more of it than necessary. So what we did is I'm going to go through a series of slides. We have some different rendered typical sections that kind of show how the trail could look in various configurations through the corridor. And then we develop some costs, both with and without lighting. We know the town's relatively rural. We're not recommending that we install pedestrian scale lighting everywhere, but around key commercial zones in Oxford Center, near Quarry Walk, down towards the southern part of the corridor where there's some more of that mixed use development, we think that would be beneficial. So the first section, which we're recommending for about 60% of the corridor, sort of a base section, would just have that 10-foot side path spaced about 5 feet from the roadway. This is that existing roadway. We wouldn't plan to adjust the existing Route 67 at all. And then you can see it's just, some flat grading behind it in many locations. The Little River is relatively close. There's several, I think there's 11 fishing areas that are publicly accessible along the Little River. In case anyone doesn't know, the Little River is stocked with trout. It's an enhanced grade A stream. So it's really good, a really good fishing asset for the community. And even driving up today, I saw someone at Hoadley Pond that was fishing. So it's something that can provide that nice connection to nature. So we're looking for locations where it can be a little bit more spaced out. For about 15% of the corridor, the side path would be essentially in front of developed areas, buildings, commercial plazas, things like that. And so in those locations, we'd like to provide that 5-foot buffer. We'd like to provide that 10-foot width. There may be some locations, whether due to utility poles, to avoid property impacts, we may neck the trail width down to say 8 feet for a short period, and we may neck that buffer down below that 5 feet for a short period. But generally speaking, it does fit most of the way, and it would sort of back onto a parking lot or access to those other businesses. So for about 20% of the corridor, things start to get a little tight with the Little River. It tends to drop off pretty quickly down towards the water course. Many of these locations, like I said, have guide rail today because of those steep slopes. So we'd really try and neck the trail in, reduce that buffer width to 2.5 feet, put in a guide rail. And then in locations where we'd have that steeper slope back down towards the water course, we'd put up a vertical barrier, a fence, between the side path and that slope, just to prevent people from falling down it, especially people biking at relatively high speed. And we've depicted like a wooden fence here. That's an option. That's not a decision that has been made yet. As any of these projects to install the path move into the design phase, that's a decision that could be made with the input of the public at a later date. You could go with a steel picket fence, this type of wood. There's a few different types of varieties. There are a few locations, mostly around the river crossings. There's 7 locations where the side path will need to cross either the Little River or one of its tributaries on a new bridge. And in the immediate vicinity of those, due to the topography, the proximity of the river, we would likely provide a retaining wall. Now, you can probably see, if you can, the immense cost of a retaining wall compared with all the other sections I showed you. So this is a section that we would only recommend where absolutely necessary. And again, typically where we're just connected into a bridge structure. There is one location just near Victory Memorial Park, Route 42, where we would require a small rock cut. There's a face of rock ledge that kind of comes down from the mountain right out towards the roadway. And so in order to put the side path in, we would need to do some rock excavation, cut that back. But again, this is a kind of a very small section of the corridor. And then finally, the last little one of these I'm going to show you is what we're calling a wayfinding or rest area. And as folks travel on this could be a 6-mile trail once it's all said and done from beginning to end, connecting the Larkin State Park Trail down to Seymour. So we want to give people the opportunity to stop, enjoy some of that scenery. And it's also likely to be implemented in phases. So at the end of each of those phases, we'd like to provide this type of rest area, places for people to sit down and provide some wayfinding. Okay, the trail maybe temporarily ends at Ridge Street. What can you do from there? Well, if you follow Ridge Street, you might be able to get to Matthews State Park or the Naugatuck State Forest. You know, provide some options and let people know what's there. And then also near some of those fishing areas, we'd like to provide these with some wayfinding. Let people know that may not know. Hey, there's really good fishing right over there if you just take a few steps over to the little river. So we had this collection of different typical sections, and we then worked with the Oxford Main Street Project Committee to identify the right routing. So the end game here is we're recommending that the trail follow the west side of Route 67 throughout the entire corridor. But we looked at different options. We looked at what if we follow the river? What if we switch sides? What, you know, different sides may be better than others. So we put together a list of evaluation criteria. And this is not an eye test. I'm not going to go through these line by line by line, but I'm just trying to kind of show you the depth of things we've looked at. It includes things like cost, transportation benefit. What type of destinations would the side path route connect you to if it was on one side or the other? We looked at impacts. Does one side require more wetland or property impacts? And ultimately, one of the biggest decision makers for us was, does it require you to cross Route 67? You know, I just talked about the speed. I talked about how I was scared standing there taking that photo. So we're really reticent to provide locations where, to follow this recreational facility, you would need to cross Route 67. So ultimately, that ended up being a real driving factor. And I'll kind of walk you through one of the examples. We had about 5 different locations where we ended up really vetting through these criteria. And I'll just walk you through one example. If there are more people that are curious, we have those the full set of them. But I'll kind of go through this first one. So this is just to the south of Quarry Walk. Quarry Walk is up. Oh, I turned off the laser pointer. Quarry Walk is kind of up at the left part of the map here. This is that little roadway called Old State Route 67. There's a liquor store right here that you may be familiar with. We've got the Little River is this kind of shaded area. It crosses twice here in close proximity. This is Echo Valley Road heading up. So in this area, we said, all right, so you know we're generally looking at this west side of Route 67. Okay, so that's one option. And then we looked at another option that would include crossing back here at the signalized intersection with the Quarry Walk driveway, and then maybe following Old State Route 67 around, and then we'd have to cross back here. And that puts us at a location that would not be signalized. We also looked at continuing it down along the east side, but you know there ends up being essentially a large mountain that comes in for a relatively long stretch. So that was essentially dismissed out of hand. But we looked at this. We said this might be feasible. This would actually allow us to cross the river fewer times. And we kind of looked at our evaluation criteria. And you know, we kind of use this consumer reports type scoring style, and we kind of looked at, well, okay, maybe this one offers some connections to the fishing destinations. Ultimately, big rights-of-way impact. Old State Route 67 is very narrow. As it came back around here towards Route 67, we might have to actually have a total take, which is something that would be very expensive, and it's a business, not something we'd want to do. And ultimately, as we compared the factors, they were pretty similar, but it was just that consistency, keeping the side path on one side of Route 67, not requiring users that are maybe traversing this entire 6-mile stretch to cross. So what we decided to do is we're going to recommend some wayfinding back up here at the traffic signal with Quarry Walk. We're going to provide some signs that point people to some of these fishing areas along the Little River. We're also going to recommend that sidewalks be put in along Old State Route 67 so that people who wanted to walk to those fishing areas from the side path could, but we are going to recommend that the side path just continue along that west side. So that's sort of an example of how we worked through this throughout the corridor. Like I said, there are about 4 locations. We had a great meeting with the Oxford Main Street Committee back in January where we walked through each of them, weighed the benefits, and kind of collectively reached those decisions. So once we'd kind of honed in on the idea of keeping the trail along the west side, we wanted to look at the implementability, working with NVCOG at the potential funding sources and DOT. I think some of them are on the Zoom call, and looking at, what's a good project cost that kind of fits within the traditional grant opportunities the town will be able to pursue. And also, what is a logical endpoint, right? So we're anticipating this thing being built in stages. We don't just want to drop it off nowhere. We wanted to identify some key points that said, all right, it makes sense to kind of temporarily end the trail here while we pursue additional funding. And as part of that, we broke the corridor up into 3 segments. And I always kind of drive the logic part of my brain crazy with the way I present this, because I start in the center and then I go to the south and then I go to the north. And I'll explain why. This all started from the Oxford Main Street Committee's vision that started with connecting Oxford Center to Quarry Walk. That's our center segment that I'll start with first. And then connecting Quarry Walk to Seymour. That's our southern segment. And then finally connecting Oxford Center to the Larkin State Park trail up in Southford, Southbury. So that's the logic on why I'm going to present this, and what, if you were to kind of just zoom into the room, you'd be like, what are you doing? So we've recommended breaking the central segment into 3 projects. Excuse me. The first of these is ongoing. The town has completed design, advertised the project, and it should be constructed this summer. And that's in the Oxford Center area from about Town Hall to Dutton Road. We've then recommended a second project to continue it down to Ridge Street, and provide sidewalk on the east side of Route 67 in Oxford Center to try and generate more of a walkable type of downtown in that area. And then the final piece of this segment would connect it from Ridge Street down to Quarry Walk. So I'm gonna pull up a little map here. This first segment, this project C1, that should be constructed this summer. It was awarded to a contractor. That's moving forward. The town had received a community connectivity grant for that. So the first thing we're really recommending implementing is continuing the side path to Ridge Street, the signalized intersection here, and then supplementing the side path with a sidewalk on the other side of Route 67. And this is a rendering of what that could look like. So we're basically standing at the driveway to the old school site, looking south. So Oxford, the bakery's right where my cursor is. So Little River is off to this side. The school site and the emergency services is off to this side. And I don't know, Jeff, have you talked to them or the public much about the potential park there, or leave that for another day? We'll leave that for another day. So the former school site off to the left, Route 67 obviously here in the middle. So this would be the 10-foot wide side path that would be installed here this summer by the Community Connectivity Project. And then we're recommending that be supplemented with a 5-foot sidewalk. And so we're recommending 2 different places that folks could cross Route 67. The first is kind of directly behind where this photo is taken. That's where the primary entrance to the Little River Nature Preserve would be. And the parking for that is intended to be in the former school site. So people will need to make that crossing. That's what we in the business call a desire line. People are going to try and cross Route 67 there anyway. So we're recommending some traffic calming features along the side path that are going to be installed as part of that community connectivity project, some lighting, some extra signage to warn of a pedestrian crossing, and then a tool that's called a RRFB, a rectangular rapid flashing beacon. I did it. That is always when I start with. So it's basically a really fancy version of a pedestrian warning sign that stands at the side of the road. You need to cross, you press a button, and it's got this light that flashes real crazy. And studies show that it actually slows drivers much more than a sign or even a person standing next to the side of the road does. So we're recommending one of those here that would facilitate accessing the Little River Nature Preserve. And then a second one kind of in the distance down at that next intersection that comes in there. So just beyond the Oxford Bakery.
I just don't want to leave the public empty on that. So what we're talking about on the center school side, the town owns, obviously our old center school, the town owns 36 acres back there. So George Temple and myself are looking into making that into a beautiful town park. So it will expand both sides of the road. There's more to come. I've just gotten started with the project, a lot more things to happen, but I wanted to leave you with something. I didn't want to leave you empty handed like what's going on. So I hope that helps.
No, thank you, Jeff. Sorry for throwing you to the bus there.
I didn't want to leave you with that.
So that second project, like I said, would get to the Ridge Street intersection, and then there'd be kind of a long run. We looked in, there's not really a good logical place between Ridge Street and kind of the Victory Memorial Park area and Quarry Walk. But there's that would really be a nice section of the side path and close that connection to Quarry Walk. There's a really nice stretch kind of through here along Route 67 where it's flat off to the side. The path could meander a bit. There's two of those fishing sites kind of here along that stretch. And then the one kind of final piece I'll mention in terms of a destination would be that Victory Memorial Park, which I don't know that anyone really goes to. It's tough to get there. You have to kind of cross Route 67 or find a place to park your car. But it's actually like a relatively nice quiet space. It's vegetated to the point where there's some nice kind of spots in it that feel secluded from the road because of the trees and the vegetation. And I think with some better access and more people knowing it's there, it could really grow a little bit in terms of its use as a municipal facility. So we would recommend some wayfinding back at the signalized intersection with Ridge Street, and then we're recommending another sidewalk system to connect over to Victory Memorial Park. So this would make that connection between Oxford Center and Quarry Walk. And then as we think about continuing south, we broke it up again into three pieces, getting down from Quarry Walk to the signalized part of Route 67 at Park Road, and then just finishing those remaining pieces at first to get to the sidewalk network in Seymour, just across the town line. And then finally, we have identified a way to continue to the Naugatuck River, the Naugatuck River Greenway. That's going to require some additional effort. That Route 67 corridor is very constrained there. But so sort of as an interim goal is to get to the sidewalk network in Seymour. So again, that first piece is a relatively long stretch from Quarry Walk down to Park Road. But again, it's got like a nice long section where the path could meander a little bit, get close to the river. And again, there's more of those fishing areas along this stretch. Once you get beyond Park Road, there's a series of commercial plazas. This could be a good opportunity for those people who are using the path if they need to stop in and get a Gatorade, they want to stop and get a bite to eat. These could be a nice kind of, especially for the folks who maybe work at some of the employment centers there. If they want to just go for a little walk at lunch, a nice little asset for those areas. And then the final piece would bring us from Great Hill Road down to that final signalized intersection at West Street, just across the town line, which is where that sidewalk network picks up. So as I pivot back to the north here, this is where we'll go from Oxford Center back up to the Larkin State Park Trail in the Southford area of Southbury. And this section has some really good kind of near-term stopping points for each of the trail systems. So, beginning at Oxford Center, which is now to the right of the map, that first section would come up to Christian Street. Here's just a rendering of this is kind of what the side path would generally look like, maybe meandering a little further into some of these flatter areas. That's sort of generally what it would look like adjacent to the roadway. And so that first part would get you up to Christian Street. And then at Christian Street, we could actually provide some wayfinding that would lead people to the Larkin State Park Trail, or the Larkin Bridle Trail as it's known. So I'll just kind of draw that on the map here. It kind of does this little loop-de-loop. And so it crosses Christian Street a little bit further back than we're ultimately going to connect to it, but we could provide some wayfinding at the end of this first project extending north from Oxford Center. The second piece would bring you past Rich Farm, some other, this is where the little river has kind of left us to kind of meander up into the hills here. So this is just sort of a nice wooded, vegetated area. Folks did pop into Rich Farm, get an ice cream, some other good destinations along this section, but mostly rural. And then the final piece would just connect to the Larkin State Park trailhead, which is just up 188. So again, we'd be entering that little bit more developed area in Southford. There's some banks, some restaurants. We'd use that signalized intersection at 188 to make that turn. And then there's already a trailhead where folks can park for the Larkin State Park Trail. And we just really tie into that. And that's sort of a high level. I have more detail if we want to get into that as part of the Q&A. I've got some other exhibits I can pull up, but we want to just give you sort of the high level understanding of what the game plan is and how we'd like to implement it. I'm gonna transition here to talk just a little bit about transit, because that was another facet of the study where we looked at the town as a whole, not necessarily just this Route 67 corridor, and tried to understand how we could provide residents and folks who work and come to Oxford with other options. There was a feeling coming into this, one of the reasons for starting this study was that folks only had the option of getting in their car and driving places. So we ran some calculations based on the demographics, the income levels, types of people that live in Oxford, rates of car ownership, density, and ultimately we found a need for about 13,000-ish rides per year. And we kind of felt that the demand for like a fixed commuter service, sort of your normal local bus route, just wasn't there. It wouldn't really be sustainable. However, there's been a real push in rural communities around the country to engage in what's called microtransit. And that's that can be done in the advent of systems and the kind of proprietary apps they use, the Ubers and the Lyfts of the world, has started to make its way into public transportation, where providers that sort of have a fleet of these smaller buses can provide demand response service. So when you need a ride, you can either book it ahead of time the day before, or you could call and ask for it and wait for somebody to come pick you up. But it enables these fleets of buses to respond and react much more dynamically than they ever were in the past. And so we've been coordinating with the Valley Transit District, which provides this service elsewhere in the Naugatuck Valley. And it seems like we've had some promising discussions about potentially having them expand their service area into the town of Oxford. That's something we had a good conversation with First Selectman Temple, and it's something that we're going to continue to look at beyond this study. So just getting to the finish line here. So like Aaron said, the report will be posted onto the website very soon. Once it goes up, there'll be a 30-day comment period where people can submit their comments to Aaron. We'll take a look and we'll look to address them. We'll get those incorporated and we'll finalize. And then we'll seek the formal endorsement of the Board of Selectmen and be happy and willing to work with the town as future grant opportunities come around to help support them in the implementation of what we think is a really cool and an exciting project that could be a real asset for the town and the region. So that's it for our presentation. So we're happy to take Q&A at this point. I'm going to still left to right. Yeah. Yep. You can, if you want to take your mask off to ask, it's hard to hear you.
No, the question I have is the land that these walkways are going to be, are they owned by the town? Are they owned by the state? Is it eminent domain that you're going to have to acquire them? Easements? Who owns the land?
Sure, good question. So, and I'll repeat that into the microphone here. So, the question is essentially who owns the land where these side paths would be constructed. So, DOT owns the Route 67 right-of-way. So it's a relatively straightforward process for the town to initiate a project that results in constructing a side path within the DOT right-of-way. That's simply requires acquiring a encroachment permit, which is a process that's done relatively frequently around the state. Then there are many locations where an easement would be required. We don't anticipate any locations where there would be a total acquisition, but there are many locations where an easement would be required onto the adjacent property. Now, that's typically everything is done to avoid eminent domain. Typically, there'd be a negotiation with the property owner, compensation, negotiated, and an easement acquired. That's sort of typically the process. I don't know if Mark or Aaron, if you guys wanted to add anything.
So in other words, if you go and buy somebody's home, is there a home along Route 67? Does the right of way allow you to take some of their front yard to expand it? Because I know people, are used to having that land
Sure.
since they lived in the house and they
Sure.
consider it theirs. Could that be an issue?
And just, I'll tell you, we've been doing these projects a long time, and the impact to adjacent property owners is probably the biggest issue we always face. And our goal is always to minimize that as much as possible, because the last thing we want to do is to have to acquire property. So as Casey was saying, we try to minimize any kind of impact. As he showed in several of his typical sections, we have opportunities to neck things down. So if it is a little bit tight and we're not quite on the state right away, okay, maybe we go down to 8 feet. We reduce the buffer. And where the path may go in front of property owners, yeah, that's going to be a challenge because we agree and we recognize that, somebody may not want that trail crossing in front of their property. But that's something that we would then, work with property owner at the time the thing is actually being built. Because the last thing we want to do is to, force somebody to sell their property. We're trying to work cooperatively.
Absolutely. Yeah.
So there are ways to minimize that impact. Maybe at that point, maybe it's, if we can't avoid something, maybe we do have to find an alternative. Maybe there's a gap, or we do have to cross 67. But believe me, last thing we want to do is to have an adversarial encounter with the property owner. Because again, in order for this thing to really be a benefit to the town, it's really got to be accepted and sort of endorsed by everybody in the town, or who might be impacted by it.
Welcome.
Would there be any designated car parking areas along the line to drive there and walk to?
So the question is, will there be any designated parking areas? And that's a really good question. There's already kind of a few that jump to mind that would be readily available. In addition to, there is parking at each of the 11 fishing locations. Some of it, it's kind of off the side of a road, but it is available. So yeah, I think starting in Oxford Center with some of the municipal facilities, parking would be available there. Moving south, like I said, there's these 11 different sites. And then of course, at Quarry Walk, I think, I couldn't 100% say this, but I would imagine as the side path is developed, we could coordinate with the property owner there. They have a lot of parking. You would imagine they would be okay with towards the front. Exactly. Yep. I'll move this way. I'll come back to you.
Oh, no, now, I'm just curious, on the businesses that would benefit from this, let's say the businesses in Quarry Walk, where you would be, sending them business or the,
Yeah.
The strip malls, is there any sort of, will they be required or, asked for any kind of financial contribution or assessment in return for, what you're providing them?
So the question is, would the adjacent commercial businesses be required to contribute to some of the, or asked to? Sure. No, that's a really good question. And there's, as we kind of evolve transportation funding here in Connecticut, it's always, as I'm sure you guys have all heard, it's always a challenge. And this idea of public-private partnerships is one that, while not used frequently, is something that's come up a lot. And you could certainly see that being a way to implement that. I think as each of these moves forward, there'll be opportunities for the town to work with those in the closest proximity to do that. And another thing that could work towards maybe the clearing of snow. That's something kind of operations and maintenance. In addition to just kind of constructing the facility. I don't know, Mark, if you had anything.
No, and again, I think we're not there yet. This is a very kind of a preliminary concept, and that would probably, when we actually get actual projects, get into design, those kinds of questions will probably be answered. I think for the most part, we won't be asking a business or even Quarry Walk to say, provide 20% of the cost to build this thing, because it is a benefit to the entire town. And if businesses in Quarry Walk benefit, then the town benefits through additional taxes and things like that, or business opportunities, because trust us, we've been studying this a long time, and one of the biggest benefits of these trails is businesses like to locate right next to these trails because they know it will get customers. Surprisingly, a lot of people like to live along these trails, and property values along the trails have also increased over time, as these facilities get built. So, but again, we're not quite there to know whether we would do something like that. Like Casey said, there are opportunities for public-private partnerships, and maybe there is a developer who might say, "Oh, sure, I'm willing to do this." We have that happen in other places where I know in Monroe, I worked on a trail, and it went through an office park, and the owner of the office park said, "This is great." He built it and provided the land through his office park, at no cost to the town. So we have some experience with that, and we'll see.
So that's perfect entrance to what I was saying. Is the Main Street project has also established a 501c3, which is a nonprofit organization so what that is designed to do is exactly what he just said. So if the businesses are doing well, they can gift or give money to this organization to develop bench donations, lighting, snow removal, any of those things that will assist in this project. So once this project's done, the Main Street project will be dissolved, the committee, and then that 501c3 will continue to remain to provide donations, money to the project to keep it alive, maintenance and everything else. Okay.
I skipped over you. I apologize.
Your estimates of per mile cost
Mhm.
we saw there take into account purchasing perhaps land? And second, how much is a total for the entire 6 miles estimate? And third, what percentage of that would be grants versus versus bonds versus whatever other kind of financing?
A three-parter. Okay, so the question is about costs, and it's about did the costs include property acquisition? What is the total for the corridor, and about the percentage grants or bonds, et cetera. So the first question is yes. So for each of those projects, using the available information we had, GIS level property lines, we did include a number for rights of way in each of those projects. So it's not in the linear foot costs, but when each of those projects popped up with a number, it's in those. And then so the second part of the question was the total. It's a little over 15 million in 2021 dollars. So obviously, as the longer things go, costs do tend to escalate, but that's the approximate number for the entire stretch. And that's kind of why we had segmented it. We had kind of a target number sort of in the kind of 1 to 3 million is like a good sizable side path project to tackle at once. And I don't know, Mark, do you want to help in the funding part of that?
Yeah, and again, it depends on the funding source. A lot of these projects are funded through a federal US DOT transportation program called Transportation Alternatives Program. That's a drawdown from, it's like a percentage of what the state of Connecticut gets in total. And that's always an 80-20 split, 80% federal, 20% non-federal. And with the TA program, the municipality is expected to provide that 20%. So, but the federal aid provides the 80%. There is also the opportunity, what's called LOTSIP. It's Local
Transportation
Capital Improvement
Yeah.
Program. It's a state-funded program that they provide grants to municipalities to do transportation improvements. The construction is 100% state dollars. The municipality is required to provide, pay for the design of that project. So we have a couple of trail-type projects under the LOTSIP program as well. So there are grants available, and typically the towns can get roughly about 80%, 80 cents on the dollar. So community connectivity is another state program, more limited funding. It's not really well suited for a larger investment, but for smaller projects, again, the state does provide some funding to do these kinds of pedestrian and bicycle enhancements. And of course, the town can just pay for it themselves.
So we got one more in the room, and then maybe we'll do some of the Zoom questions after that. Go ahead. So the question is this the same project that has done some of the volunteerism and the Little River Nature Preserve? So Aaron, Mark, and I are not. So we're essentially working with them in developing this implementation plan for the trail system. So I don't know, Jeff and Helen, I don't know if you can speak more to the kind of the next steps for the Oxford Main Street Project Committee. And I think you touched on maybe it going away, but the 501(c) staying, is that?
In some way, but I had never heard back once
Okay, so this is a town on board.
Yeah.
So anybody who wants to get involved can easily get involved. Just join the meeting. You can listen and ask questions or email questions to the board. But I guess the question is volunteering to do.
I'm assuming this website is probably dropped or something.
Well, it took, we had to get some funding to get the site up and everything else, so which is Kathleen was the grant writer for Oxford, which we recently left. She has some help with Helen is our new grant writer. And Kathleen did an amazing job raising, I think it was $3 million grants or something like that. Yeah, so to answer your question, we've already raised quite a bit of money. But the new board is going to be established on the 22nd, which is the first meeting. once that's established and everything's put back in place, we love any system.
I just want to figure out which avenue to take to be part of.
Well, I can give you my card, I can send you the agenda of the meeting. And we'd love anybody who'd like to jump in and help.
Then I have a question.
Sure.
So I love the idea, I think it was Valley.
Yeah, Valley Transit District, yeah.
Right. Yeah. Yeah, as part of the work program, and what we were tasked with was to look at transit possibilities. And as Casey sort of indicated, the likely ridership is not there to establish sort of a fixed route system of any kind. But like he said, Valley Transit provides these dial rides or demand responsive. And we have had conversations with the general manager down there, and he's always interested in expanding his service. So it is a possibility. It's something we explored. They do have sufficient vehicles. And basically what it would, they run up into Seymour as it is. They provide service in Seymour, and Sonia, Derby, and Shelton. So Oxford is a logical next town over because it's right next to Seymour. So we can explore how that kind of system would work. And it could just be, Casey was saying, a microtransit where somebody needs a ride, they call in, a bus is dispatched. And what VTD was talking about, they would probably have buses here already. Not like they wouldn't have to come all the way up from Derby to get a trip. They'd already have staged some vehicles up here. This was a very preliminary look. What we at the NVCOG want to do in our coming fiscal year is to look at the opportunities for micro transit in the region. Up in the Waterbury area, we have CT Transit runs fixed route buses. Down close in the southern part of the valley, we have Greater Bridgeport Transit provides fixed route service in those towns. There's a big gap between Oxford, Southbury, Middlebury, Woodbury, Naugatuck even, and Beacon Falls. So what we want to do is look at those smaller towns and say, okay, does that lend itself to a micro transit type of system? And working with VTD, come up with some ideas. So it's a possibility, not 100%, because part of the issue with transit systems is is the cost. And most of the transit systems are subsidized by state funds, so we also have to work with DOT on establishing the setup and just how it works. But other parts of the country have looked at this kind of service, and it actually has been fairly successful. So stay tuned. Maybe next year we'll have another public meeting about that kind of a service, and it is something we are intending to look at next year.
And for Oxford, we looked at a couple alternatives in terms of ways to provide it. And obviously, we're recommending VTD is the most efficient. We looked at the town could theoretically start their own. That didn't really kind of the numbers that it wasn't really that cost effective to do that. Then the other option that some places do is they actually subsidize rides on Uber and Lyft. They basically set a flat fare with Uber and Lyft, and that on the average day there's like 1 or 2 Uber or Lyft drivers in the kind of Oxford, Beacon Falls, Seymour area, and it just didn't seem efficient that way either. That tends to work really well as like a last mile. You have a commuter rail station getting people to and from. That was we did look at a few different things to come to that conclusion. So since it's 2021 and we're now all so familiar with Zoom, maybe we'll take a few questions off of Zoom. Oh, nice, nice.
So would the pathway always be on the southwest side of 67?
Yes. Could people hear you say that on the Zoom, or should I re-say the question? So the question was, will the pathway always be on the southwest side of Route 67? And the answer to that is yes, that is the recommendation, with some additional sidewalk network recommended on the other side to help connect to key destinations.
So for folks living on 67, will residents be responsible with snow removal or other maintenance portion being built in front of their property?
Snow removal question. Yes. So the question is, who will be responsible for snow removal? We similar to some of the other questions that we've answered, we're not quite there yet. That's something that will need to be identified.
Can I answer
Yeah.
that instead?
Yeah.
The answer would be no. The residents would not be responsible for maintaining and snow removal of this trail. If this trail is built using federal state dollars, then the town has to enter into an agreement with the state. They will be responsible for maintenance. Now, the question of snow removal is to be determined because these trails do not have to be, cleaned during the winter. Some towns do, some towns don't. Derby plows their greenway, because it is so well used, they do plow. That is a responsibility of the city. Middlebury, I'm not sure, Middlebury doesn't, okay. So Middlebury doesn't, remove the snow on their greenway during the winter. So, but it would not be the responsibility of the adjacent owner. Because this is going to be likely built with state and federal dollars, and there's a requirement that the town take responsibility for maintenance.
Can we just make sure that came through? Nice.
And then one more. Are the plans to connect to the center of Southbury or connect Southbury to the Oxford section?
Are there plans to connect to Southbury? Yeah, so I think a good next step might be, I don't know.
We haven't had any contact from
We kind of talked about it a couple times, and obviously it comes up into Southford, that neighborhood of Southbury, and we felt that the Larkin State Park Trail was sort of always the end game for us to connect to. But I think it would be great. So I think stay tuned for more.
Well, and to another plug for the NBCOG is we are about to start developing what we're calling an active transportation plan, which looks at bicycle, pedestrian, and other non-motorized modes throughout the region. And that is probably, something we should look at. Aaron is the multi-use trail guru or czar in the region. So that may be something we can look at is how to make that next connection. Because again, the idea, and this is a statewide goal too, is that we have a lot of trails throughout the state and they want to make sure we get all of them connected. We're working on how to connect the airline trail with the Farmington Canal Trail, which can connect to our Naugatuck River Greenway Trail, which could connect to this trail as well. Understand these projects take a long time. I was working in Bridgeport many years ago. In 1991, I started on a project along the Quantic River in Bridgeport, Trumbull, and Monroe. Fast forward to 2021, and it's essentially complete, but there's still a couple of gaps. So it takes time, but we can get there. So we just keep our perseverance and keep working on it.
Okay. I think sort of an added benefit of connecting trails and making longer networks is that you sort of draw an entirely new user of, sort of bike tourists that, will go on vacation to a place where there's a network of trails. And, that's a whole nother economic benefit that's, far beyond what, local users are spending on trails. So, if you can connect a bunch of trails together or, create a super long trail, it's a really great benefit.
Assuming sort of best case scenario, I guess, what is the estimated time frame?
I can't answer that. There's a short, Casey mentioned, the connectivity program is building a short section. I think with this study, one of the problems this town had faced previously is that there would be an application in to either DOT or to us for part of this thing. But without having this kind of a master plan, it was hard to, it was hard to sort of endorse it. So with this, the town can start looking at it, and there are, like I said, there are programs. The Transportation Alternatives Program, the LOTSIP. And, many of the projects that Casey, how he broke, the $1.5 million to 2 million, 2.5 million, those are good, nice sized projects that, can be funded pretty easily. So, yeah, and it depends, because if you start building a couple of sections, you can build momentum, and when you build that momentum, things go quicker. But it's really hard. I'd hazard to make a guess, but we're in it for the long term, long haul. It's not going to be 2 years to get this whole thing built. It's probably more likely closer to maybe 10 for the whole thing.
If you could separate out like the grant portion, like just the physical implementation. Do you have an estimate of how long it would physically take to build it, leaving aside all of like the paperwork and the grant applications?
I'm not quite sure.
The construction time?
Oh, construction time. Typically, the way Casey broke these sections out, they seem to be pretty straightforward.
They'd all be within a season each.
Yeah.
They'd all just
Takes
over a
about a
summer
year,
period.
yeah.
Yeah.
Trails are easier to build than roads. You don't have to dig down as deep for base and sub-base. We're dealing with maybe 10-foot wide. So roughly, a season, which is about 9 months.
April, October. Yeah.
Yeah.
Along the 6 miles, how many crossings per se would be implemented for access to residential areas that are on each side of the 67 or commercial, again?
Yeah. So all the signalized intersections, so that starts in the southern part of the corridor. Oh, sorry, the question was, how would you be able to access it from the east side of Route 67? So starting, first of all the signalized intersections, we'd recommend providing the kind of full suite of pedestrian crossing tools. And then as we get further north, there aren't as many of those. So I mentioned the 2 in Oxford Center, and then 1 at each of Hawley and Christian Street are the places kind of in the northern part. And what we would try and do is, if there's any kind of significant side roads in close proximity to those crossing locations, at least try and provide a sidewalk to connect from those up to the place. Because we're trying to balance, the cars are moving fast, especially in those more rural areas. There's not a lot of, what tends to slow drivers down is activity. If there's not a lot of activity, we don't want to create a situation where we're putting a crossing in an unsafe location. So those are the locations we'd identified based on field review, looking at sight lines, and by being kind of near kind of larger scale, even if unsignalized intersections, they're a place where drivers would be expected to encounter a pedestrian crossing the road. Zoom? Oh, a handout. Michael, you can, you might want to type it in the chat. You can try and say it. I might be able to hear you. I can repeat it for the room.
Can you hear me?
I can hear you.
Okay, thank you. This may be a totally different subject, but you were talking about going down 67 towards Seymour.
Yep.
Presently, it's a challenge sometimes just to get your car moving on 67 with the Quarry Walk apartments when they open up. When the, I don't know, the people call it the trailer park, it's not that, but that other construction that's going on with the smaller houses, and talks of on Rick Street of building more apartments, and also the possibility of additional section at Oxford Greens. Anything that you're going to do there, I don't know if there's been any conversation about the congestion and the backup of traffic and having this path. Is that going to affect any future, ability to do anything to help that situation?
No, thank you for your question. For the people in the room, do you want me to repeat that, or were you? Okay, yeah. So the question was with existing traffic on Route 67 and potential new development around town, is congestion an issue that we looked at, or is it an issue that the side path would either contribute to or would prevent the ability to address congestion? So we did take traffic counts at the signalized intersections. They all operate at like level of service A or B. So we weren't really seeing any congestion issues. I could understand at certain times of the day, it could certainly be difficult trying to turn out of your driveway. I would imagine the recommendations of this study, the offering an opportunity for folks to walk and then, potentially bringing in some of that micro transit service should only help. And I don't really see a long-term widening project of Route 67, but that's not something that our study looked at. I don't know, Mark, if you would add anything.
Yeah, I think you covered it pretty well. And also, we're not recommending any changes to the configuration of 67. So the way the road looks now is going to be the way the road will look, once this trail is built. So we're not going to, worsen any congestion that's out there. And as development takes place, the town and the state are going to also look at that development's impact to the road. So something like Quarry Walk, the state looked at that and they said, okay, this is going to be such a large development. You have to make improvements to that intersection. You
Right.
have to install that traffic light. You have to do whatever they feel is necessary. As other developments take place, similar types of things will be required. I think with this plan in place, the town would have some ability, if a developer came in and wanted to do some kind of a large development, they could say, well, as part of our approval, you have to help us build part of this trail. Getting back to that question about, would you get a public-private partnership type thing? That's one case where you could. It's like if there is another development coming in, you can ask them to contribute to building part of that trail as part of the conditions for that approval. So, but we're not likely to well, we aren't going to worsen congestion, and we might improve it if we reduce some people from having to drive. Because that's sort of the intent, is like instead of having people drive from point A to point B to point C within a short distance, maybe they'd be more willing to walk or they want to ride the bicycle. So we'll hopefully have a positive impact.
Yeah, it was interesting. We studied some of the origin destination patterns on traffic, and the most frequent trip was between Quarry Walk and the Dunkin' Donuts, a little bit further down. Maybe people will be more willing to walk. It's not that far.
Okay, thank you.
You speak to any of the major pinch points, like I know you said that there's the layering, you've got the rock cut. Just off the top of my head, I think like Brookside Inn, you're staying on the other side. That's their parking right there. I'm just curious what solutions for situations like that.
Yeah, I think so. Yeah, right. So the question is, some of the pinch points in the corridor, how would we kind of envision tailoring the side path installation to essentially make it fit? And so in particular at Brookside, I think that's one where we'd identified just to, you bring the trail right next to the edge of the road, neck it down to 8 feet just for that short frontage to mitigate the parking lot as best you can. I think the crossings of the river are sort of the biggest constraints. So we've done a couple of these around the state where they're much more inexpensive than like a vehicular bridge would be. They kind of come prefabricated. Most of the crossings are relatively short, sort of 40, 45 feet. And essentially the bridge comes prefabricated. They bring it on a truck. The contractor builds up the abutments, puts in the bridge on top. So, I think those are probably the biggest constraints. And then, like you said, some of the commercial properties where we would look at just mitigating the width of the facility as much as we needed to fit it in. That utility poles too, another kind of. Sorry, say that again. Yeah, I think so. Yeah. So the question is, would the crossings of the water courses be separate from the roadways? And yeah, we looked at the bridge inspection reports on all of the bridges, and none of them are like about to need to be replaced, and none of them have a millimeter to spare. Most of them have a narrower shoulder than the road has. So that's, and just based on the short distance, we felt it was more cost effective to build a separate structure than to try and widen the existing one. Some of them are concrete arches too, which are pretty difficult to construct. Anything else on Zoom? Okay. Oh, question.
You have to be publicized more or get more people to.
And again, yeah, I mean, we are available to attend Board of Selectmen meetings, Planning and Zoning Commission meetings. We attend the Oxford Main Street committee meetings. We push it out as best we can. And, we ask the town to, advertise it on, the town's website. So, yeah, we try as much as we can, but you're right. But again, as this progresses to a actual design and an actual project, there'll be more public information meetings, more opportunity for comment.
Do you have any suggestions? So we, Helen did yeoman's work getting our flyers up around town. We were active in some of the social media groups, posting. Yeah, we right. Right, which is why we tried to put some of the hard copies of these flyers around town at some of the businesses, and it's also. I mean, look, I'm actually really pleased with the turnout. We were a little nervous here coming out of COVID lockdown and everything, how many we get. So I'm happy to see all your faces. I'll tell you. Sure. No, yeah.
And again, I rely on everybody here as well. Word of mouth sometimes is the best form of advertising. Our website is, Aaron provided it. It's nvcog.ct.gov.
And if you guys want to take any of these flyers, there's a bunch of these flyers. They have a little stand you can get to them.
But, we do try to provide it, there's a lot of information on the website. And like I said, the town, posted it on their website, so.
So the question is about retaining walls. No, I don't think in front of Rich Farm, it would require a retaining wall. Yeah, no, we've looked at that. I think, there may be, you might steepen that a little bit, but I don't believe, having looked at that site, that it would require a retaining wall.
And again, if design would answer that question definitively, when we get to that. We didn't do any survey work for this. It was looking at GIS and parcel mapping and things like that.
Contours,
so that's good at the planning level, but at a design level, no. And we would, a consultant would do a full survey of, to get exact property lines and exact contours. And that's when we would know exactly what would be faced in certain areas.
You would send the retaining walls and kind of come up bridges, right? So you're kind of talking about like a wall.
Yeah, that's generally where the retaining walls would be in the corridor is sort of close. It's usually where the river is just so close to the side of the road that there's really no room to do anything else.
Okay. On my perusal of the right-of-way maps for Route 67, in most areas, the right-of-way is large.
Yeah.
The roadway itself doesn't even use up half of the
Right.
right-of-way. So in probably 99% of these areas, it would be outside of the actual state right-of-way. I mean, a couple of those areas, it's actually 100 feet wide.
Yeah, there are some locations where it's very wide. Yeah, where we and which is good because it means you wouldn't require easements for to take anyone's land for long stretches of the corridor.
The other thing I have is, they were considering at one point, connecting to the Larkin Bridle Trail by going up the Larky Road right away.
Yeah.
Has that been thrown out?
We looked at it. It's just really long. We looked at Larky, we looked at Christian Street, we looked at Holly Road, and we looked at just extending all the way up Route 67. And
That's the shortest one?
well, it is if you set the origin as the trail on Route 67 in the Little River, right? So I think we felt that the committee felt that the opportunities to connect to Southford and the what's the park there with the waterfalls? Yeah, that offered some additional opportunities to connect to some other things.
I never remember the committee ever discussing going into Southbury, to be absolutely honest with you.
Okay, I mean,
And I'm one of the original members of that committee. And I don't ever remember talking about going up into Southbury.
it was at our January meeting. We did a big long.
We had a meeting in January? I don't remember.
Yeah, the notes
Yeah.
from that meeting and the presentation are on the website.
Was it a virtual meeting?
Yes. I mean,
The other thing with Larky Road is it's very steep.
Yeah.
So there's requirements of, especially when a trail is federally funded or state funded, there's requirements on, the grade that you have to meet. Mark can talk a little bit more to that.
It's all related to ADA.
I accept the fact that you disregarded that thing, but it was mentioned, that's why I asked.
okay, sure. Yeah, no, sorry. Yeah, we looked at those 4 different ways to connect to the Larkin Trail. And based on the evaluation criteria and in our analysis, we thought that kind of bringing it all the way up Route 67 to Southford offered kind of the best subset, while also offering Christian Street, Holly Road as already built ways people to connect in the interim. And look, if there was a real push for the town to create something along the Larky Road right away, it's not to say it couldn't happen.
All right. Again, thank you for
joining us. Really appreciate it. Thank you.
And please visit our website and continue to provide comments. This isn't the end of it. It's sort of the beginning, I guess, in a way.
And we had, if you picked up one of those comment forms, you want to leave one with us, you want to mail them back in or scan them and email them, any and all welcome. And there's just also on the website, there's a comment button you can hit and get those same 3 questions. So whatever you prefer.
You're the one in charge of this for Cotton?
I am
No.
not.
He is.
I work for COG.
Okay. So
He's
you're the
our
one-
hired hand.
Okay. Let me have your card with your email, please.
Okay.